Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we begin today's attack report, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe. Also, write now in the comments which city you're watching from. We'd love to know. All of this because, driving down the winding mountain road, I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles turning white. The dense forest surrounding me seemed to close in, the shadows of the trees casting an ominous spell over the narrow, twisting path. I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of unease, as if the very landscape was alive and watching my every move. As I reached the trailhead, a chill ran down my spine, and I paused for a moment, surveying the area. The sound of snapping twigs and rustling leaves in the distance only heightened my anxiety, making me wish I had never decided to venture into this remote wilderness. But I had come here to escape the stresses of the outside world, and I was determined to see it through. Shouldering my pack, I set off into the unknown, my steps quickening as I tried to outpace the growing sense of dread. Little did I know, the true horror was yet to come. The forest seemed to swallow me whole, the towering trees blocking out the sun and casting an eerie, twilight-like glow over the path. The deeper I ventured into the forest, the more the sense of isolation grew. The only sounds were the crunch of leaves beneath my feet and the occasional bird call, which only seemed to accentuate the deafening silence that surrounded me. I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched, my eyes darting to and fro, searching for any sign of movement. As night fell quickly, I hurried to set up my camp, eager to escape the eerie darkness that had descended upon the forest. I zipped up the tent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being observed, that some unseen presence was out there, lurking in the shadows. I tried to push the thought from my mind, telling myself that I was being paranoid, that I was alone in the wilderness. But deep down, I knew that something was wrong. Very wrong. I lay awake for what felt like hours, the sounds of the forest seeming to close in around me. The hoot of an owl, the snap of a twig, the rustling of leaves. Each sound had me jumping, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I should try to sleep, to conserve my energy for the hike back in the morning, but the growing sense of unease made it impossible. Suddenly, a noise outside the tent caught my attention, and I froze, my breath caught in my throat. It sounded like the snapping of a branch, followed by the faint crunch of leaves. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound, but the darkness seemed to swallow it up. Slowly, I unzipped the tent, peering out cautiously, my eyes searching the blackness for any sign of movement. At first, I saw nothing, but then, a flash of movement caught my eye, a dark shape darting behind a nearby tree. My heart raced as I strained to get a better look, and that's when I saw it. A massive, hulking figure, its outline barely visible in the dim light. It was far too large to be a bear, and the way it moved with an unnatural fluidity sent a chill down my spine. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Who's there?" But there was no response, only the eerie silence of the forest. I waited, my eyes glued to the spot where I had seen the creature, but it had vanished as if it had simply melted into the shadows. Slowly, I retreated back into the tent, my hands shaking as I zipped it up once more. What the hell was that, I wondered, my mind racing with a million possibilities. Had I truly seen what I thought I had seen? Or was it just my imagination, playing tricks on me in the dark? I lay there, tense and alert, for what felt like an eternity, my eyes scanning the darkness beyond the thin walls of the tent. And then, it happened. A sound, a deep, guttural growl that sent a shiver down my spine. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, as the sound grew closer, echoing through the trees. Suddenly, a massive shape materialized outside the tent, looming over me like a towering monolith. I caught a glimpse of glowing red eyes and a mouthful of razor-sharp teeth, and in that moment I knew. This was no ordinary animal. This was something else. Something terrifying and primal, a creature straight out of my worst nightmares. I opened my mouth to scream, but the sound caught in my throat, choking me. All I could do was stare, transfixed as the creature reared back, its massive arms raised high, poised to strike. Awoken by a strange noise, I cautiously unzipped my tent, peering out into the moonlit forest. My heart raced as I caught a glimpse of a massive, hairy figure lurking in the shadows, its outline barely visible against the darkness. I froze. My breath caught in my throat as the creature seemed to sense my presence, its head turning in my direction. Adrenaline surging, I scrambled to grab my flashlight, desperately searching for the mysterious creature. But as I shone the beam of light into the forest, the figure had vanished, leaving me with a growing sense of dread. Had I really seen what I thought I had seen? Or was it just my imagination playing tricks on me in the eerie stillness of the night? I gripped the flashlight tightly, my knuckles turning white as I scanned the area, searching for any sign of the creature. But the forest seemed eerily silent, as if it was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. Determined to protect myself, I grabbed a sturdy branch and ventured out, scanning the area for any sign of the creature. The shadows seemed to close in around me, and the sound of my own footsteps crunching on the leaves only heightened my sense of vulnerability. I strained my ears, listening for any hint of movement, but the forest remained eerily silent. As I rounded a bend, a sudden movement caught my eye, and I whirled around, my makeshift weapon raised, ready to defend myself. But there was nothing there, just the empty forest, the moonlight casting strange, flickering shadows on the ground. And then, without warning, a deafening roar shattered the stillness, causing me to jump and nearly drop the branch. Before I could even react, a towering ape-like beast charged towards me, its red eyes glowing with menace. I felt a surge of pure terror as the creature closed in, its massive form looming over me, its powerful jaws snapping viciously. "No!" I cried, my voice barely above a whisper as I swung the branch with all my might, desperately trying to fend off the attack. But the creature seemed unfazed, batting the branch aside with a casual swipe of its massive paw. In the span of a heartbeat, I found myself hurled to the ground, the breath knocked out of me as I crashed against the hard-packed earth. Pain seared through my body, and I cried out in agony, my pleas for help lost in the darkness of the forest. The Bigfoot stood over me, its red eyes glaring down with a primal fury that sent a chill down my spine. I tried to scramble backwards to get away from the towering beast, but it was no use. I was trapped, helpless against the sheer power and ferocity of the creature. As the Bigfoot raised its massive arm, poised to strike, I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself for the inevitable. But the blow never came. Instead, the creature let out a deafening roar, its attention suddenly diverted. I opened my eyes, my heart pounding to see the Bigfoot lumbering away, disappearing into the shadows of the forest. I lay there, stunned and shaking, unable to believe what had just happened. Had the creature spared me? Or was it merely toying with me, waiting to finish me off later? The uncertainty only added to the growing sense of dread that consumed me. Slowly, I pulled myself to my feet, my body aching from the impact of the fall. I knew I had to get out of this forest, to find safety and help. But the idea of venturing back out there, of potentially encountering the Bigfoot again, filled me with a primal terror. As I made my way back to the tent, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the creature was still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for its next opportunity to strike. I had to get out of here, to put as much distance between myself and the Bigfoot as possible. But the thought of leaving the relative safety of the camp only filled me with dread. I hesitated, my hand trembling as I reached for the zipper of the tent. What should I do? Stay and risk another encounter with the monstrous creature, or venture out into the unknown hoping to find a way to safety? The decision weighed heavily on my mind, and as I stood there, torn between two equally terrifying options, I knew that my life had just been irrevocably changed by this horrific encounter. Struggling to regain my senses, I watched in horror as the monstrous Bigfoot turned its attention to my campsite, ripping through my supplies with ease. The creature seemed driven by a primal rage, tearing apart my tent and scattering my belongings with savage, powerful swipes of its massive claws. I huddled behind a nearby tree, my heart pounding in my chest, as I witnessed the utter devastation. Everything I had brought with me, The few meager possessions that had provided me a sense of security in this hostile wilderness was being destroyed in a matter of moments, and I was powerless to stop it. Gasping for breath, I tried to crawl away, but the creature's gaze fixed on me, its massive jaws opening wide as it let out a bone-chilling roar. The sound was unlike anything I had ever heard, a deep, guttural bellow that seemed to reverberate through the very earth beneath me. I froze, paralyzed by fear, as the Bigfoot took a step towards me, its red eyes blazing with a primal fury. I knew I should run, that my only chance of survival was to get as far away from this monstrous creature as possible. But my legs refused to move as if they were rooted to the spot. "Please," I found myself whispering, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. "Don't hurt me." The Bigfoot paused, its massive head tilting to the side, as if it were considering my plea. But any hope I may have had was quickly dashed as the creature let out another deafening roar and resumed its advance, its footsteps shaking the ground beneath me. I frantically searched for a way to defend myself, but my options were limited. The Bigfoot was too powerful, too relentless for me to stand any chance against it. I scanned the area, desperately looking for a weapon, a fallen branch, anything that could give me even the slightest advantage. My eyes settled on a large rock partially obscured by a tangle of underbrush. Without a moment's hesitation, I lunged for it, my fingers wrapping around the rough surface as I hefted it in my hands. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. As the Bigfoot closed in, I summoned every ounce of courage I possessed and hurled the rock with all my might, aiming for the creature's head. The impact seemed to stagger the Bigfoot, causing it to pause mid-stride, but it was only a momentary respite. "Go away," I shouted, my voice shaking with fear. "Leave me alone." But the Bigfoot merely let out a deafening roar in response, its eyes narrowing as it fixed its gaze on me once more. Trapped and helpless, I braced myself for the inevitable as the creature closed in, its hot, foul breath washing over me. I closed my eyes, praying for a swift end, for the pain and terror to be over. If this was to be my final moment, I wanted it to be quick, to spare me from the agony of being torn apart by this monstrous creature. But the blow never came. Instead, the Bigfoot paused, its attention seemingly diverted. I opened my eyes, slowly, cautiously, and to my astonishment, the creature was no longer focused on me. It had turned its back, its gaze fixed on something in the distance, a low, rumbling growl emanating from its massive chest. I seized the opportunity, mustering the last of my strength to begin crawling away, my body aching with each agonizing movement. I dared not make a sound, terrified that the Bigfoot would turn and resume its attack. I had to get as far away from this nightmare as possible, to find a way to safety and escape the clutches of this monstrous creature. To my surprise, the Bigfoot remained stationary, its attention seemingly fixed on something in the forest. I paused, my breath caught in my throat, as I watched the creature take a few steps forward, its massive frame disappearing among the trees. What could have possibly diverted the Bigfoot's attention away from me? Was there another creature out there? Something even more powerful and dangerous that had caught the Bigfoot's interest? The thought sent a chill down my spine, and I knew that I couldn't afford to waste this opportunity. Mustering every ounce of strength, I began to crawl away, my fingers clawing at the soft earth as I dragged my battered body through the undergrowth. The pain was excruciating, but the fear of the Bigfoot's return kept me moving, propelling me forward with a desperate determination. As I made my way through the forest, I couldn't help but glance back over my shoulder, half expecting to see the towering form of the Bigfoot looming behind me. But the creature had disappeared, its focus seemingly elsewhere. I allowed myself a moment of relief, but I knew it was only temporary. The Bigfoot would return, of that I was certain. And when it did, I had to be as far away from this cursed place as possible. I had to find a way to escape, to get to safety and report what had happened. But even as the thought crossed my mind, I knew that no one would believe my story. Who would believe that a creature like the Bigfoot, a legendary beast that most dismissed as mere myth, had attacked me in the dead of night? I pushed the doubt from my mind, focusing instead on the task at hand. I had to keep moving, to put as much distance between myself and the Bigfoot as possible. The forest seemed to close in around me, the shadows deepening with each passing moment, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was still out there, watching, waiting for its opportunity to strike again. As I struggled to make my way through the dense undergrowth, I couldn't help but wonder how I had ended up in this nightmare. Just hours ago, I had been searching for a peaceful escape, a chance to leave the stresses of the outside world behind. But now I found myself fighting for my very life, trapped in a hellish scenario that seemed straight out of a horror story. The thought of never making it out of this forest alive filled me with a sense of dread, and I redoubled my efforts, pushing onward despite the pain and exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm me. I had to keep going, to find a way to safety and somehow, some way, convince the world that the Bigfoot was real, and that it had nearly claimed my life in a savage, horrifying attack. As the forest began to thin and the sound of a distant road reached my ears, I allowed myself a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could make it out of this alive. But even as the thought crossed my mind, I knew that the true horror was only just beginning. Each agonizing step sent waves of pain through my battered body. But I knew I had to keep moving. The forest had become a nightmare, and I was its prey. The lingering terror of my encounter with the Bigfoot fueled my desperate flight, pushing me beyond what I thought my broken body could endure. "Keep going," I muttered to myself, my voice barely a whisper. "Don't stop. Don't look back." I stumbled through the dense undergrowth, my heart pounding in my chest. The darkness seemed to close in around me, every shadow potentially hiding the monstrous creature that had attacked me. Branches and thorns tore at my skin as I fled, leaving bloody scratches across my arms and face, but I barely noticed the pain. My only thought was to put as much distance between myself and the Bigfoot as possible. The forest seemed to fight against my escape, roots reaching out to trip me, low-hanging branches whipping across my face. I could hear my own ragged breathing, punctuated by the snapping of twigs beneath my feet. Every sound made me flinch, certain that at any moment I would hear the thunderous approach of the Bigfoot behind me. Driven by pure terror, I stumbled and tripped over a fallen log, crashing hard to the ground. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and for a moment, I lay there, gasping for air, my body screaming in agony. "Get up," I wheezed, forcing myself to my feet. "You can't stop, not now." As I struggled to regain my footing, a sound froze me in place. The distant crack of breaking branches followed by what could only be described as a low, guttural growl. The Bigfoot was still out there, still hunting me. Panic surged through me, lending me strength I didn't know I possessed. I took off running again, no longer caring about stealth or direction. My only thought was to get away, to find safety, to survive this nightmare. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping across my face, leaving stinging welts. The sound of the creature's thunderous footsteps in the distance only spurred me on. It was getting closer, I was sure of it. I could almost feel its hot breath on the back of my neck, its massive hands reaching out to grab me. "No, no, no," I chanted under my breath, pushing myself harder. My lungs burned. My legs felt like lead. But I refused to give up. I couldn't let that thing catch me again. Just when I thought I couldn't go on any further, when my body was ready to betray me and collapse, I caught a glimpse of something through the trees. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, a hallucination born of fear and exhaustion. But as I drew closer, I realized what I was seeing. A small cabin in the distance. Hope surged within me, giving me a second wind. "Thank God," I gasped, mustering a final burst of speed. The cabin represented safety, shelter, maybe even help. It was my only chance. As I burst from the tree line into a small clearing, I could see the cabin more clearly. It was old and weathered, looking as if it hadn't been used in years. But it was solid, real, a potential haven from the horror pursuing me. I stumbled across the overgrown yard, my eyes fixed on the cabin's door. Behind me, I heard a deafening roar that shook me to my very core. The Bigfoot had emerged from the forest, its massive form silhouetted against the trees. "No!" I screamed, throwing myself at the cabin's door. I pounded on it frantically, my fists beating a desperate rhythm. "Help! Please, someone help me! Let me in!" But only eerie silence greeted my pleas. There was no movement from within, no sign that anyone had heard my desperate cries. The sense of dread that had been my constant companion since the attack intensified, threatening to overwhelm me. I risked a glance over my shoulder, my heart nearly stopping as I saw the Bigfoot lumbering towards me, its red eyes gleaming with malevolent hunger. It was so close now, close enough that I could smell its musky animal odor. "Please," I whimpered, turning back to the door, clawing at it with bloody fingers. "Someone, anyone, help me." But the cabin remained silent, indifferent to my plight. I could hear the Bigfoot's heavy breathing now, feel the ground trembling beneath its massive footsteps. In mere moments it would be upon me, and this time, I knew there would be no escape. With nowhere left to run, I pressed my back against the unyielding door, facing the approaching monster. Tears streamed down my face as I realized this might be my last moments alive. The Bigfoot towered over me, its massive form blocking out what little moonlight filtered through the trees. As it reached for me with enormous hair-covered hands, I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But suddenly I felt the door give way behind me. I tumbled backward into the cabin, landing hard on a dusty wooden floor. Before I could process what had happened, I heard the door slam shut, followed by the sound of a heavy bolt sliding into place. I lay there in the darkness, my heart pounding, barely daring to breathe. Outside, I could hear the Bigfoot's furious roars, its massive fists pounding against the cabin's walls. But the old structure held firm, a barrier between me and certain death. As the adrenaline began to fade, the full extent of my injuries made themselves known. Every part of me ached, and I could feel warm blood trickling from numerous cuts and scratches. But I was alive, at least for the moment. "Hello?" I called out weakly, peering into the gloom of the cabin. "Is someone there? Thank you for letting me in." But there was no response. The cabin was as silent inside as it had been when I was pounding on the door. I was alone, trapped in an abandoned building with a monster lurking just outside. As I struggled to sit up, my mind raced with questions. How had the door opened? Was there someone else here, hiding in the shadows? And most importantly, how long would this flimsy wooden structure protect me from the determined beast outside? The Bigfoot's roars continued, punctuated by the sound of splintering wood. I knew that my reprieve might be short-lived. This nightmare was far from over, and as I huddled in the darkness of the mysterious cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The door slammed shut behind me, and for a moment I stood there, panting, my heart racing. The sudden silence was almost as terrifying as the Bigfoot's roars. I knew I couldn't waste a second. Frantically, I began barricading the door with whatever I could find: an old, rickety chair, a small table, anything to create a barrier between me and the monster outside. As I worked, I scanned the cabin, searching desperately for a weapon or a means of escape. The interior was sparse, filled with dust and cobwebs. A musty smell permeated the air, a testament to how long this place had been abandoned. My eyes darted from corner to corner, but it was clear that I was completely isolated. There were no other exits, no windows large enough to crawl through. I was trapped. "Think, Andrew, think," I muttered to myself, my voice sounding strange and hollow in the empty cabin. "There has to be something you can use." But as I searched, my hopes dwindled. The cabin was devoid of anything useful, no tools, no weapons, nothing that could give me an advantage against the Bigfoot if it managed to break in. Suddenly, a sound from outside made me freeze. The Bigfoot's roar echoed through the forest, closer than before. A shiver ran down my spine, and I felt my knees go weak. I knew it was only a matter of time before the creature found me. "No, no, no," I whispered, pressing my back against the wall. "Please, just go away." But the roars continued, growing louder, more insistent. I could hear the sound of trees snapping in the distance, the thunderous footsteps drawing nearer. My mind raced with terrifying possibilities. How long would it take for the Bigfoot to find this cabin? How long would these old, rotting walls hold against its immense strength? Desperate, I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking as I tried to dial 911. But as the screen lit up, my heart sank. No signal. Of course. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere with no way to summon aid or warn anyone of the danger. "Damn it," I shouted, throwing the useless device across the room. It clattered against the far wall, the sound seeming to echo in the empty space. As night fell, the cabin grew colder. I huddled in a corner, wrapping my arms around myself in a futile attempt to ward off the chill. But the cold was the least of my worries. My mind raced with thoughts of the Bigfoot and its relentless pursuit. Every creak of the cabin's old timbers, every rustling leaf outside, had me on edge. "It's just the wind," I tried to reassure myself. "It's not out there. It can't find you here." But even as I said the words, I knew they were a lie. The Bigfoot was out there hunting me, and sooner or later, it would find this cabin. Hours passed, each one feeling like an eternity. Exhaustion and pain began to take their toll. My body ached from the earlier attack and my frantic escape through the forest. Cuts and bruises I hadn't even noticed before now throbbed with a dull, persistent pain. But I refused to let my guard down. I couldn't risk falling asleep, not with that thing out there. The slightest sound had me jumping, my heart pounding in my chest. A branch scraping against the roof became the Bigfoot's claws tearing through the wood. The wind howling through the trees transformed into the creature's bone-chilling roar in my mind. "Get a grip," I muttered, pressing the heels of my hands against my eyes. "You're letting your imagination run wild." But was I? After what I'd seen, what I'd experienced, how could I be sure of anything anymore? The Bigfoot was real, a nightmare come to life, and it wanted me dead. As the night wore on, my thoughts turned to home, to the life I'd left behind. Would I ever see my family again? My friends? Or would I die here, alone in this godforsaken cabin, torn apart by a monster that shouldn't exist? "I should never have come here," I said aloud, my voice cracking. What was I thinking, coming out to the middle of nowhere alone? But recriminations wouldn't help me now. I had to focus on survival. I had to find a way out of this nightmare. Just as I was considering making a run for it, surely it would be better to take my chances in the forest than to wait here for the Bigfoot to find me. I heard it. A low, guttural growl so close it seemed to vibrate through the cabin's walls. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. The growl came again, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps circling the cabin. It had found me. The Bigfoot was here. "Oh God," I whispered, pressing myself further into the corner, as if I could somehow melt into the walls. "Please, no." The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was silence, and then, with a deafening roar, something massive slammed against the cabin's door. The entire structure shook, dust raining down from the ceiling. The barricade I'd constructed groaned under the assault, the old chair splintering with a sharp crack. I scrambled to my feet, looking wildly around the cabin for anything I could use to defend myself. But there was nothing. I was trapped, alone, with no weapon and no hope of escape. As the Bigfoot continued its assault on the door, each impact threatening to tear the cabin apart, I realized that this might be my last stand. If I was going to die, I would face my end on my feet, not cowering in a corner. With trembling legs, I stood in the center of the cabin facing the door. The wood was beginning to splinter, and I could see flashes of matted fur and gleaming red eyes through the widening cracks. "Come on then," I said, my voice barely audible over the sound of destruction. "Let's end this." As the door finally gave way, the Bigfoot's massive form filling the doorway, I braced myself for what was to come. A deafening crash shattered the silence, and I watched in horror as the Bigfoot's massive form burst through the cabin's door. The makeshift barricade I had constructed disintegrated under the creature's raw power, splinters of wood flying in all directions. Its eyes, glowing with savage fury, locked onto me instantly. "No, no, no," I whimpered, stumbling backward, my eyes wide with terror. The Bigfoot filled the doorway, its enormous frame blocking out what little moonlight filtered in from outside. The stench of wet fur and something primal, almost prehistoric, filled the small cabin. I was backed into a corner, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. My eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. But the creature was too fast, closing the distance between us in 2 massive strides. It towered over me, easily twice my height, its powerful jaws snapping inches from my face. I could feel its hot, fetid breath washing over me, see the yellowed fangs that could easily tear me apart. A guttural growl rumbled from deep within its chest, vibrating through the floorboards beneath my feet. "Please," I gasped, though I knew it was futile. This wasn't some intelligent being I could reason with. This was a primal force of nature, driven by instincts I couldn't begin to comprehend. In that moment, with death staring me in the face, something snapped within me. A surge of adrenaline coursed through my veins, and I knew I had to fight. I couldn't just stand there and let this monster end my life without a struggle. My eyes landed on an old wooden chair in the corner. It was rickety and probably wouldn't do much damage, but it was all I had. Summoning every ounce of strength I possessed, I lunged for the chair, my fingers wrapping around its worn frame. With a yell that was equal parts terror and desperation, I swung the chair at the Bigfoot's head. "Get away from me!" I screamed, putting all my weight behind the blow, but it was like hitting a brick wall. The Bigfoot simply batted the chair aside, splintering it as if it were made of matchsticks. The creature seemed entirely undeterred by my pathetic attempt at self-defense. If anything, it only seemed to enrage it further. The Bigfoot let out a roar that shook the very foundations of the cabin. Dust rained down from the rafters, and I felt the vibrations in my bones. The sound was unlike anything I had ever heard before. Primal, ancient, and filled with unbridled fury. I pressed myself against the wall, my legs trembling, barely able to support my weight. As the Bigfoot closed in, I felt a surge of primal terror wash over me. This was it. This was the end. I knew with absolute certainty that I was about to die, torn apart by a creature that shouldn't even exist. My life flashed before my eyes, memories of my family, my friends, all the things I had yet to do and experience. Regret washed over me. Why had I come out here alone? Why hadn't I told anyone where I was going? "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was apologizing to. Maybe to myself, for making such a foolish decision. Maybe to my loved ones who would never know what had happened to me. The Bigfoot raised one massive, fur-covered arm, its claws glinting in the dim light. I braced myself for the inevitable, squeezing my eyes shut. I didn't want my last sight to be those terrifying red eyes and gnashing teeth. But the blow never came. Cautiously, I opened one eye, then the other. The Bigfoot had paused, its arm still raised, but its gaze had shifted. It was as if it had sensed something else in the forest, something that had momentarily distracted it from its prey. Me. For a moment, we stood there in a bizarre tableau. The massive creature poised to strike, me cowering against the wall, both of us frozen in place. Then, with a final earth-shaking roar that made my ears ring, the Bigfoot turned and lumbered away. I watched in utter shock and disbelief as the creature's massive form disappeared into the darkness of the forest. The sound of breaking branches and heavy footfalls faded into the distance, leaving behind an eerie silence. For several long moments I couldn't move. I stood there, pressed against the wall, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Had that really just happened? Had I truly come face to face with a Bigfoot and lived to tell the tale? Slowly, on shaky legs, I made my way to the shattered remains of the cabin's door. The cool night air hit my face, a stark contrast to the stuffy interior of the cabin. I peered out into the darkness, half expecting to see the Bigfoot lurking just beyond the tree line. But there was nothing. No glowing red eyes, no massive shadowy form. Just the quiet rustling of leaves in the gentle night breeze. "What the hell?" I muttered, running a trembling hand through my sweat-soaked hair. What just happened? The adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins began to ebb, and with its departure came the pain. Every muscle in my body ached, and I could feel warm blood trickling from various cuts and scrapes. But I was alive. Somehow, against all odds, I had survived. As the reality of the situation began to sink in, a new fear took hold. The Bigfoot was still out there. It could return at any moment. And next time, I might not be so lucky. I knew I couldn't stay in the cabin. With the door destroyed, it no longer offered even the illusion of safety. But the thought of venturing back out into the forest where that monster was roaming free filled me with dread. Still, I had no choice. I had to try to find my way back to civilization, to get help, to warn others about the danger lurking in these woods. Even as the thought crossed my mind, I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Who would believe me? A story about being attacked by Bigfoot. They'd think I was crazy. But I knew what I had seen, what I had experienced. The terror was real, the danger was real. And as I steeled myself to step back out into the darkness, I knew that my nightmare was far from over. The Bigfoot was still out there, and I had to find a way to escape this forest before it found me again. Trembling uncontrollably, I huddled in the corner of the battered cabin, my eyes fixed on the splintered remains of the door. The Bigfoot's sudden departure had left me in a state of shock, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The cabin remained eerily silent save for the sound of my own ragged breathing. Is it really gone? I whispered to myself, afraid that even the slightest noise might draw the creature back. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. But the Bigfoot didn't return. Slowly, I began to realize that this might be my only chance to escape. I couldn't stay in this cabin forever, and the thought of facing that monster again was unbearable. Summoning what little strength I had left, I stumbled towards the door, my body aching from the creature's assault. As I reached the threshold, I paused, peering out into the darkness. The forest outside seemed to taunt me, daring me to venture forth. Every shadow looked like a lurking threat, every rustling leaf a potential sign of the Bigfoot's return. "Come on, Andrew," I muttered to myself. "You can do this. You have to do this." Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the cabin. The cool night air hit my face, a stark contrast to the stuffy interior I'd been trapped in. I glanced around, half expecting to see glowing red eyes staring back at me from the darkness. But there was nothing. I set off down the mountain, my steps unsteady on the uneven ground. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest, and I could feel warm blood trickling from various cuts and scrapes. But the fear of the Bigfoot's return kept me moving, pushing through the pain. As I made my way through the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves had me jumping, my nerves frayed beyond measure. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced that at any moment I would see the massive form of the Bigfoot bearing down on me. "It's not there," I told myself repeatedly. "You're just paranoid. Keep moving." But the fear was relentless. In the darkness, every tree trunk looked like the Bigfoot's towering form, every shadow a potential threat. The forest, which had once seemed so peaceful, had transformed into a nightmare landscape. After what felt like hours of stumbling through the wilderness, I finally caught sight of something that made my heart leap, the glint of moonlight on metal. The main road. With a surge of energy I didn't know I had left, I quickened my pace. As I broke through the tree line, the sight of the empty road stretching out before me nearly brought me to tears. I had made it, I had escaped. I staggered onto the asphalt, my legs finally giving out. I collapsed to my knees, gasping for breath, my body trembling with exhaustion and residual fear. My clothes were torn to shreds, my skin marred by scratches and bruises. I must have looked like I'd been through hell, which, in a way, I had. It was then that I heard the sound of an approaching vehicle. Headlights appeared in the distance, growing brighter as the car neared. I waved my arms frantically, desperate for help. The car slowed to a stop, and a middle-aged couple peered out at me with concern. "Are you all right, son?" the man asked, stepping out of the car. "What happened to you?" The words tumbled out of me in a rush. There was a Bigfoot. It attacked me, in the forest. It was huge, with red eyes. I trailed off as I saw the looks on their faces, a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "A Bigfoot?" the woman said skeptically. "Honey, I think you might have hit your head. Let's get you to a hospital." "No, you don't understand," I insisted, my voice rising with frustration. "It was real. It tried to kill me. We need to warn people." But it was clear they didn't believe me. The man helped me into the back of their car, exchanging worried glances with his wife. "Just relax," he said soothingly. "We'll get you some help." As we drove towards the nearest town, I fell silent, the full weight of what had happened settling over me. I had survived a nightmare, only to find that no one would believe my story. The Bigfoot had disappeared without leaving any concrete evidence, and I was left with nothing but my own traumatic memories and the wounds on my body. Exhausted and defeated, I let the couple take me to the local hospital. The doctors treated my injuries, attributing them to a fall in the forest. They suggested I might have been hallucinating due to dehydration and exhaustion. No matter how much I tried to convince them, no one believed my account of the Bigfoot attack. Hours later, I retreated to my home, haunted by the memory of the Bigfoot's glowing red eyes and the sheer power of its attack. As I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, I knew that the creature had shattered my sense of safety. The world suddenly seemed like a much more dangerous, unpredictable place. "It was real," I whispered to the empty room. "I know what I saw, what I experienced." But even as I said the words, a small part of me wondered if I was trying to convince myself. The encounter had been so horrifying, so outside the realm of normal experience, that it almost seemed unreal in the light of day. One thing was certain, though. I would never be the same. The memory of the Bigfoot, its savage fury and inexplicable presence, had changed me forever. The morning light filtered through my bedroom curtains, but I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing red orbs, heard that bone-chilling roar. The Bigfoot's presence lingered, a phantom that refused to fade even in the light of day. I dragged myself out of bed, wincing at the pain that still radiated through my body. The mirror reflected a haggard face, dark circles under my eyes, and a myriad of cuts and bruises, physical reminders that what I'd experienced wasn't just a nightmare. It was real, I muttered to my reflection. I know it was. But doubt gnawed at me. The world outside my window looked so normal, so ordinary. How could a creature like that exist without everyone knowing about it? I stumbled to my computer, ignoring the pile of work emails that had accumulated during my absence. Instead, I opened a browser and began searching. Bigfoot sightings, Sasquatch attacks, giant ape-like creature in forests. Hours passed as I scoured the internet, hoping to find some confirmation that I wasn't alone, that others had witnessed the creature's existence. But the search yielded nothing concrete. Sure, there were plenty of blurry photos and second-hand accounts, but nothing that matched the terrifying reality of what I'd experienced. No reports of recent sightings in the area where I'd been attacked. It was as if the creature had appeared solely for me, then vanished back into myth. "This can't be happening," I groaned, rubbing my temples. The lack of information was maddening. How could something so massive, so terrifying, leave no trace? Desperate for answers, I decided to reach out to the authorities. Surely they would take my claims seriously. I mean, look at me. I was clearly attacked by something. I dialed the local sheriff's office, my heart pounding as the phone rang. "Sheriff's Department, how can I help you?" A gruff voice answered. "Yes, hello," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to report an attack in the forest a few days ago. It was a Bigfoot." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, "Sir, are you feeling all right? Have you been drinking? No, I'm perfectly sober, I insisted, frustration creeping into my voice. I'm telling you, there's a dangerous creature out there. It attacked me. I barely escaped with my life. Right, the voice drawled, skepticism evident. And I suppose this Bigfoot left you his business card too, huh? This isn't a joke, I shouted, my composure cracking. People need to be warned. It's not safe out there. Listen, buddy, the voice hardened. We don't have time for prank calls or crazy stories. If you've actually been assaulted, come down to the station and file a report. Otherwise, please don't tie up this line. The call ended with a click, leaving me staring at the phone in disbelief. They didn't believe me. No one believed me. As the day wore on, I sank deeper into a state of despair. I tried calling other authorities, park rangers, wildlife services, even a local cryptozoologist I found online. But the response was always the same. Dismissal, disbelief, sometimes outright mockery. Sitting on my couch, surrounded by printouts of inconclusive Bigfoot evidence and scribbled notes from my fruitless phone calls, I couldn't help but wonder, had it all been in my head? Was the Bigfoot simply a figment of my imagination, a twisted creation of my tormented mind? Maybe I am crazy, I whispered to the empty room. The thought was almost comforting. Insanity, at least, would be an explanation. But then my gaze fell on the tattered remains of my hiking clothes, still caked with dirt and blood. I ran my fingers over the deep claw marks in the fabric, wincing as I touched the matching wounds on my skin. The lingering pain, the torn clothing, the vivid memories, they all told a different story. I stood up abruptly, pacing the room. No, I said firmly. It happened. The Bigfoot was real. I'm not crazy. Yet the doubt lingered. If the creature was real, why was there no evidence? Why had no one else seen it? Why did it attack me specifically? I found myself standing in front of the mirror again, staring at my battered reflection. The man looking back at me seemed changed, haunted. The encounter had altered me, not just physically, but deep inside. I knew a truth that no one else believed, carried a burden of knowledge that felt impossibly heavy. I can't just let this go, I told my reflection. I have to find answers. I have to prove it was real. But how? The forest where it happened was vast, and the thought of returning there sent a shiver of fear through me. The authorities had made it clear they wouldn't help. And who else could I turn to without sounding like a complete lunatic? As night fell, I sat by the window staring out at the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, the Bigfoot was still roaming free. Was it watching me even now, its red eyes gleaming in the darkness? Would it come for me again? The questions swirled in my mind, unanswered and maddening. But one thing was clear. I couldn't simply return to my normal life and pretend nothing had happened. The encounter had changed me, marked me, and until I found some answers, until I could prove to myself and the world that I wasn't crazy, I knew I would never truly rest. With a heavy sigh, I turned away from the window. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new attempts to uncover the truth. But for now, all I could do was try to sleep and hope that the nightmares wouldn't come. As I lay in bed, the shadows in my room seemed to shift and move, playing tricks on my weary mind. And in the distance, just on the edge of hearing, I could have sworn I heard a low, rumbling growl. Real or imagined, it didn't matter. The Bigfoot had become a part of me now, a mystery I had to solve, no matter the cost. The calendar on my wall mocked me, its pages flipping by as weeks turned into months. But time seemed to have lost all meaning. Every night I relived the horror of the Bigfoot's attack in my dreams, waking up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding as if I were still running for my life through that dark forest. Even in my waking hours, I couldn't escape the memory. The smallest things would trigger flashbacks, the rustling of leaves in the wind, the crack of a branch under someone's foot, even the sight of a large, hairy dog. Each time, I'd find myself back in that moment, staring into those glowing red eyes, feeling the creature's hot breath on my face. One afternoon, I was sitting in a local coffee shop, trying to distract myself with work on my laptop. A barista accidentally dropped a tray, the loud clatter echoing through the cafe. Before I knew it, I was on my feet, eyes wild, scanning the room for danger. "Sir, are you okay?" the young barista asked, concern etched on her face. I blinked, suddenly aware of the stares from other patrons. Yes. Sorry. Just startled me, I mumbled, sinking back into my chair, face burning with embarrassment. But I couldn't shake the fear. My eyes kept darting to the windows, half expecting to see the Bigfoot's massive form lumbering down the street. The fear had become a constant companion, an unwelcome shadow that followed me everywhere. As the days wore on, I found myself withdrawing more and more from the world. Friends would call, inviting me out, but the thought of being in crowded places, of trying to act normal when I felt anything but, was overwhelming. "Come on, Andrew," my best friend Mike pleaded over the phone. "We haven't seen you in weeks. Just come out for a drink. It'll do you good." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "I can't, Mike. I'm not feeling up to it. Is this about that camping trip? Look, man, I know something happened out there, but you need to talk to someone. This isn't healthy." I felt a flare of anger. "You don't understand. None of you do. I can't pretend everything's normal." "Then explain it to us," Mike insisted. "We're worried about you, Andrew." But how could I explain? How could I articulate the horror I had experienced without being dismissed as delusional? I had tried, in those first few weeks, to tell people what had happened. The looks of disbelief, the awkward silences, the not-so-subtle suggestions that I seek professional help, they had all driven me further into isolation. "I'm fine," I lied. "I just need some time. I'll call you later, okay?" I hung up before he could protest, guilt gnawing at me. But the thought of trying to socialize, to act as if my world hadn't been turned upside down, was unbearable. In the quiet moments when the house was silent and still, I would find myself staring into the distance, lost in the memory of the Bigfoot's glowing eyes and the sheer power of its assault. I could still feel the impact of its massive paw swatting me aside, still hear the splintering of wood as it tore through the cabin door. One evening, as I sat on my back porch, watching the sun set over the distant tree line, my neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, called out to me. "Evening, Andrew. Haven't seen you around much lately. Everything okay?" I turned to her, forcing a smile. "Yeah, Mrs. Johnson, just been busy with work." She frowned, her kind face creased with concern. "You look tired, dear. Are you sleeping all right?" For a moment, I was tempted to tell her everything. About the Bigfoot, the attack, the nightmares that plagued me. But I knew how it would sound. Instead, I just nodded. Just a bit of insomnia. Nothing to worry about. As she wished me good night and retreated into her home, I felt the weight of my isolation more keenly than ever. The trauma had scarred me, both physically and emotionally. The cuts and bruises had healed, but the mental wounds remained raw and open. I found myself wondering if I would ever be able to escape the shadow of the Bigfoot. Had the creature forever altered the course of my life? Would I always be looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows, unable to trust the world around me? That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I tried to imagine a future where the memory of the Bigfoot didn't dominate my every waking moment. But it seemed impossible. The encounter had changed me fundamentally, shaking my understanding of the world to its core. "There has to be a way to move past this," I whispered to the darkness. But even as I said it, I knew it wouldn't be easy. The Bigfoot may have disappeared back into the forest, but its presence lingered in my mind, a constant reminder of the unknown horrors that lurked in the shadows. As I drifted off into an uneasy sleep, one thought echoed in my mind. I had to find a way to reclaim my life, to step out of the Bigfoot's shadow. But how could I move on when no one believed me? How could I find peace when I knew the truth about what was out there? The questions swirled in my mind, unanswered and haunting. And as I fell into another nightmare-filled sleep, I knew that my struggle was far from over. The Bigfoot may have spared my life that night in the forest, but in many ways it felt like it had taken something from me that I might never get back. My sense of safety, my peace of mind, my connection to the world around me. The battle to reclaim those things, I realized, might be the greatest challenge I had yet to face. Years had passed since that fateful night in the forest, but the memory of the Bigfoot attack remained etched in my mind, a constant presence that refused to fade. As I sat in my dimly lit living room, staring out at the tree line that bordered my property, I couldn't help but feel a familiar sense of unease creep over me. My therapist, Dr. Samantha Carter, leaned forward in her chair, her brow furrowed with concern. "How have you been sleeping, Jack?" she asked gently. I tore my gaze away from the window and forced a weak smile. "About as well as can be expected," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "The nightmares. They're not as frequent, but when they come..." Dr. Carter nodded sympathetically. "They're just as intense as before?" "More so sometimes," I admitted, running a hand through my graying hair. "It's like I'm right back there, feeling its hot breath on my face, hearing that bone-chilling roar." The therapist jotted something down in her notebook before looking back up at me. "Jack, we've talked about this before. You've made significant progress in dealing with your trauma, but I can't help but feel that you're still holding on to something that's preventing you from fully moving on." I let out a bitter laugh. "Moving on? How can I move on when I know what's out there? When I'm the only one who knows the truth?" Dr. Carter sighed, setting her notebook aside. "Jack, we've discussed this. There's no evidence to support..." "No evidence?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "What about the scars? The nightmares? The way my life has been completely upended? Physical injuries and psychological trauma don't prove the existence of a mythical creature," she replied calmly. "We've explored other possibilities. A bear attack, a fall, even a psychotic episode triggered by stress and isolation." I stood up abruptly, pacing the room. "I know what I saw, what I experienced. It wasn't a bear and I wasn't hallucinating. It was real, and it's still out there." Dr. Carter watched me for a moment before speaking again. "Jack, have you considered that perhaps it's not the creature itself that's haunting you, but the fear of not being believed? The isolation that comes with carrying a secret you feel you can't share?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I sank back into my chair, suddenly feeling drained. "Maybe," I admitted quietly. "But that doesn't change what happened." As Dr. Carter packed up her things to leave, she placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Try to focus on the present, Jack. On rebuilding your life. The past can't hurt you unless you let it." After she left, I found myself once again drawn to the window, my eyes scanning the tree line as if expecting to see a massive, hairy figure emerge at any moment. The rational part of my mind knew it was unlikely. I had moved hundreds of miles away from the site of the attack. But the fear, the constant vigilance, had become a part of me. The next day, I decided to take a hike in the nearby state park, determined to prove to myself that I could still enjoy nature without succumbing to paralyzing fear. As I walked along the well-maintained trail, I felt a mix of anxiety and exhilaration. "You're doing great, Jack," I muttered to myself, taking deep breaths to calm my racing heart. "It's just a normal forest. Nothing to be afraid of." But as I ventured deeper into the woods, the familiar sense of unease began to creep over me. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, my hand clutching the pepper spray I now carried everywhere. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the forest, causing me to spin around, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Is anyone there?" No response came, but I could have sworn I saw something move in the shadows of the dense underbrush. Panic began to set in, and before I knew it, I was running back down the trail, my breath coming in ragged gasps. As I burst out of the tree line into the parking lot, I collided with another hiker, sending us both sprawling to the ground. "Whoa, easy there," the man exclaimed. picking himself up and offering me a hand. "You okay, buddy? You look like you've seen a ghost." I accepted his help, struggling to catch my breath. I'm fine," I managed to say between gasps. "Just thought I saw something in the woods." The man's expression changed from concern to interest. "Oh yeah? What kind of something? We get all sorts of wildlife out here." For a moment I was tempted to tell him everything, about the attack years ago, about the creature that still haunted my dreams. But the memory of all the disbelieving looks, the pitying stares, and the not-so-subtle suggestions that I seek psychiatric help held me back. "Probably just a deer," I lied, forcing a smile. "Startled me, that's all." The man nodded, seemingly satisfied with my explanation. "Yeah, they can be pretty jumpy." "Well, take care and enjoy the rest of your hike." As he walked away, I couldn't help but feel a pang of loneliness. How many times had I held back, kept my experiences to myself for fear of being labeled as crazy or delusional? The isolation Dr. Carter had mentioned weighed heavily on me. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing out on life. The Bigfoot attack had changed me, both physically and mentally. As I pulled into the small mountain town of Laurel Falls, the locals eyed me with suspicion. The diner waitress, a weathered woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, approached my car and rapped on the window. I rolled it down, a friendly smile on my face. "You folks sure don't get many visitors around here," I said, trying to break the tension. She leaned in, her brow furrowed. "You shouldn't be wandering those woods at night," she warned, her voice low and serious. "There's something out there and it ain't friendly." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I tried to play it off. "Oh, come on, how bad could it be?" I chuckled. "I'm just here for a little hiking and exploring. What's the worst that could happen?" The waitress shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Your funeral," she muttered, before turning and walking back into the diner. I watched her go, a strange unease settling in the pit of my stomach. But I quickly pushed it aside, eager to get out and see the forest for myself. After all, how dangerous could a few trees really be? Ignoring the waitress's warning, I set out on the trail behind my motel, the lush, foreboding forest beckoning me forward. The setting sun cast long, ominous shadows between the towering pines, and a sense of foreboding crept up my spine. As I ventured deeper into the woods, an eerie silence fell over the landscape. The snap of a branch made me spin around, my heart pounding, but I saw nothing, save for the unnatural stillness of the trees. I pressed on, my senses on high alert, and then a deep, guttural growl rumbled from the blackness ahead. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. Something was out there watching, waiting. Terror seized me as a massive, hulking figure materialized between the trees. Eyes glowing with a primal intensity, it let out a bone-chilling roar and charged straight for me. I turned and ran, my legs pumping as fast as they could carry me. Branches whipped at my face, but I didn't dare slow down. The creature was gaining on me, its thunderous footsteps shaking the ground. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my leg as the creature's massive hand wrapped around my calf, yanking me to the ground. I hit the forest floor hard, the air knocked out of my lungs. Scrambling backward, I stared up in horror as the beast loomed over me, drool dripping from its gaping jaws. "No, no, please," I screamed, my voice cracking with terror. "Leave me alone." But the creature paid no heed to my pleas. With a savage roar, it reached down and grabbed me, lifting me off the ground with ease. I dangled helplessly, kicking and thrashing as the beast carried me deeper into the forest. I screamed until my voice gave out, begging for help that I knew would never come. The forest was eerily silent save for the creature's guttural growls and the sound of my own ragged breathing. Suddenly, sharp claws raked across my back, drawing warm blood. The beast let out a triumphant roar and I cried out in agony, my vision blurring. Darkness closed in as the creature's jaws clamped down on my shoulder, searing pain radiating through my body. And then, nothing. I had lost consciousness, at the mercy of the savage beast. When I finally came to, I was alone, the creature gone. I lay there disoriented and in agony, my body aching with every movement. Adrenaline surging, I forced myself to my feet and began to run, stumbling and desperate to reach safety. Emerging from the forest, I spotted a passing motorist and waved them down, my clothes torn and bloodied. The driver, a middle-aged woman, pulled over, her eyes wide with horror. "Please, you have to help me," I begged, my voice hoarse. "There's a monster out there." The woman stared at me in stunned silence, unsure if she was really hearing what I was saying. "A monster? What are you talking about?" "In the woods," I gasped, my heart pounding. "It attacked me and I barely escaped. You have to call the police, or the park rangers or someone." The woman's brow furrowed, a mix of confusion and concern on her face. All right, just calm down. Let's get you to the hospital first and then we can figure out what to do." As I climbed into the car, I glanced back towards the forest, half expecting the creature to come charging out, but the trees stood silent and still, the only sound the pounding of my own heart. I knew no one would believe my story. The beast had vanished, leaving me with only the memory of its savage attack. And as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. I turned and ran, my lungs burning as I pushed my legs to their limit. Branches whipped at my face, drawing stinging cuts across my skin, but I didn't dare slow down. The creature was fast, its thunderous footsteps closing the distance with every step. Desperation fueled my sprint, adrenaline coursing through my veins. But the forest seemed to close in around me, the shadows growing thicker and more oppressive with each passing moment. I couldn't outrun it. This thing, this beast, was too fast, too powerful. Suddenly, my foot caught on an exposed root, and I went down hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. I scrambled backward, my heart pounding in my ears as the massive form of the creature materialized from the darkness. Drool dripped from its gaping jaws, its glowing eyes fixed on me with a primal, predatory hunger. No, please," I cried, my voice cracking with sheer terror. "Stay back." But the beast paid no heed to my pleas. With a deafening roar, it surged forward, its powerful hands reaching out to grab me. I tried to dodge, to slip away, but it was too fast. Its fingers wrapped around my legs and I was lifted off the ground, dangling helplessly as the creature carried me deeper into the forest. I screamed until my voice gave out, my cries echoing through the eerie silence. The beast didn't slow, its thunderous footsteps shaking the very earth beneath us. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through its veins, the raw power in its muscles as it effortlessly carried me along. Suddenly, sharp claws raked across my back, drawing warm blood. I cried out in agony, my vision blurring as the creature let out a triumphant roar. The pain was blinding, radiating through my body with each heartbeat. And then, the creature's jaws clamped down on my shoulder, searing pain lancing through me. Darkness began to creep in at the edges of my vision, and I felt my consciousness slipping away. I was at the mercy of this savage beast, powerless to stop its attack. The last thing I remembered was the sound of my own ragged breathing, the coppery taste of blood in my mouth, and the creature's triumphant growl as it dragged me deeper into the forest. And then, nothing. The darkness consumed me, and I knew no more. When I finally came to, I was alone. The creature was gone, and I lay there in the eerie silence, disoriented and in agony. Every movement sent shockwaves of pain through my body, but I knew I had to get out of this place to find help. Forcing myself to my feet, I began to stumble and limp my way back towards the edge of the forest. The trail was harder to follow in the darkness, and I found myself constantly glancing over my shoulder, half expecting the creature to come charging out of the shadows. But the forest remained still and silent, save for the sound of my own labored breathing and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. As I neared the tree line, I spotted a car on the road ahead and frantically waved it down, my clothes torn and bloodied. The driver, A middle-aged woman pulled over, her eyes widening with horror as she took in my disheveled and injured state. "Oh my God, what happened to you?" "Please, you have to help me," I begged, my voice hoarse and strained. "There's a monster out there, in the woods. It attacked me, and I barely escaped." The woman stared at me, her brow furrowed in confusion and concern. "A monster? What are you talking about?" "In the forest," I gasped, the adrenaline still coursing through me. "You have to call the police, or the park rangers, or someone. It's still out there, and it'll kill someone else if they go in." She hesitated, her eyes darting towards the tree line and then back to me. All right, just calm down. Let's get you to the hospital first, and then we can figure out what to do." As I climbed into the car, I couldn't help but glance back towards the forest, half expecting to see the creature come charging out, but the tree stood silent and still, the only sound the pounding of my own heart. I knew no one would believe my story. The beast had vanished, leaving me with only the memory of its savage attack. And as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. I awoke with a start, my heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or what had happened. Then the pain hit me, a dull, throbbing ache that seemed to encompass my entire body. The events of the night before came rushing back, and I had to stifle a scream. The creature, the attack, the terror. I was lying on the forest floor, surrounded by dense underbrush. Weak sunlight filtered through the canopy above, indicating it was early morning. How long had I been unconscious? I tried to move and winced as fresh waves of pain coursed through me. Suddenly, I heard a twig snap nearby. My breath caught in my throat and I froze, straining my ears. Was it back? Had the monster returned to finish what it had started? Another snap, closer this time. Panic surged through me, overriding the pain. I had to get out of here. Now. Gritting my teeth, I forced myself to my feet. My legs trembled, threatening to give way, but I steadied myself against a nearby tree. The movement sent shockwaves of agony through my battered body, and I bit down hard on my lip to keep from crying out. I took a tentative step forward, then another. Each movement was agony, but the sound of something large moving through the underbrush spurred me on. I didn't dare look back, focusing all my energy on putting one foot in front of the other. As I stumbled through the forest, my mind raced. What was that thing? How had I survived its attack? And most importantly, how was I going to get out of here? The sound behind me grew louder, more insistent. Branches snapped and leaves rustled. Whatever it was getting closer. Panic lent me strength I didn't know I had. I broke into a stumbling run, ignoring the screaming protests of my body. Branches whipped at my face, reopening cuts from the night before, but I barely noticed. All that mattered was escape. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to blur, marked only by the pounding of my heart and the ragged sound of my breathing. But suddenly, miraculously, I burst out of the tree line onto a deserted road. I nearly wept with relief. Civilization, safety. But I wasn't out of danger yet. I could still hear movement in the forest behind me. As if in answer to my prayers, a car appeared in the distance, heading my way. I stumbled to the middle of the road, waving my arms frantically. "Hey, stop, please help me." The car slowed, then pulled to a stop beside me. An older man leaned out the window, his eyes widening as he took in my battered appearance. "Good Lord, what happened to you?" he asked, shock evident in his voice. "Please," I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. "You have to help me. There's something in the woods. It attacked me. We need to call the police." The man's expression shifted from concern to skepticism. "Something in the woods? What do you mean?" I knew how crazy it sounded, but I was beyond caring. A monster, a huge hairy creature like Bigfoot. It grabbed me, dragged me into the forest. I barely escaped. The man's frown deepened. "Bigfoot? Listen, son, I think you might have hit your head or something. Why don't you get in and I'll take you to the hospital?" I wanted to argue, to make him understand the danger, but exhaustion was quickly overtaking me. My legs buckled, and I sagged against the side of the car. "Whoa there," the man said, opening his door and coming around to help me. "Easy now. Let's get you some help." As he helped me into the passenger seat, I caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of the forest. For a moment, I thought I saw a massive dark shape watching us from between the trees. But when I blinked, it was gone. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice trembling. The man looked where I was pointing, then shook his head. "I don't see anything but trees, son. Come on, let's get you to a doctor." As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept glancing in the side mirror, half expecting to see the creature burst out of the forest in pursuit. But the road behind us remained empty. "What's your name, son?" the man asked, breaking the tense silence. "Emily," I replied, realizing I hadn't introduced myself. "Emily Matthews. Thank you for stopping." "John Hawkins," he said with a nod. "And it's no trouble. Couldn't very well leave you out there in that state. Now you want to tell me what really happened?" I took a deep breath, wincing at the pain in my ribs. "I know it sounds crazy, but I'm telling you the truth. I was hiking in the woods last night when this thing attacked me. It was huge, at least 8 feet tall, covered in thick, matted fur. It grabbed me, dragged me deeper into the forest. I thought I was going to die." John's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "And you're sure it wasn't a bear? We get some pretty big ones around here." I shook my head vehemently. It wasn't a bear. It walked on 2 legs, had hands like a human but bigger, and its face— I shuddered at the memory. Its eyes were almost human, but filled with this savage intelligence. John was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was low, almost reluctant. "You know, there have been stories around these parts for years. Hikers gone missing, strange noises in the night. Most folks write it off as tall tales, but—" He trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. My heart raced. "You believe me?" John sighed heavily. "I don't know what to believe, Miss Matthews, but I know these woods, and I know there are things out there that can't be easily explained. Whatever happened to you, I'm just glad you made it out alive." We lapsed into silence as he drove, the pain in my body a constant reminder of the ordeal I'd been through. As we approached the town, I could see people going about their morning routines, oblivious to the horror that lurked in the nearby forest. "We're almost to the hospital," John said as we turned onto the main street. "They'll take good care of you there." I nodded, grateful for his kindness but dreading what was to come. How could I explain what had happened? Who would believe me? As John pulled up to the emergency entrance, a terrible thought struck me. I had no proof, no evidence of what I'd encountered. It was my word against the accepted laws of nature, and I knew which one people would be more likely to believe. "John," I said as he helped me out of the car, "thank you for everything, but do you think anyone will believe me?" He looked at me for a long moment, his weathered face etched with sympathy. "I don't know, Miss Matthews, but the truth has a way of coming out, one way or another. You just focus on getting better for now." As the emergency room staff rushed out to help me, I cast one last glance at the distant tree line. The monster was still out there, I was sure of it. And as much as I wanted to forget, to pretend it had all been a terrible nightmare, I knew I couldn't, because if I didn't find a way to prove what had happened, to warn others of the danger, it would only be a matter of time before someone else fell victim to the beast in the woods. The morning after my terrifying encounter, I found myself standing at the edge of the forest once again. My body ached, and fear gnawed at my insides, but I was determined to prove what had happened. I couldn't let that creature roam free, potentially harming others. I'd managed to convince a local park ranger, Mike, to accompany me. He stood beside me now, his weathered face set in a mask of skepticism. "You're wasting your time," he grumbled, adjusting his hat. "There's nothing out here but trees and squirrels." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I know what I saw, Ranger Mike, and I need to show you where it happened. He sighed heavily. All right, Miss Matthews, lead the way. We set off into the forest, retracing my steps from the night before. Every snapping twig and rustling leaf set my nerves on edge. I kept expecting to see those glowing eyes peering out from the shadows. It was around here, I said as we reached a small clearing. This is where it first appeared. Mike looked around, his expression unimpressed. I don't see anything out of the ordinary. We searched the area where I'd been attacked but found little evidence. A few broken branches, some disturbed undergrowth, but nothing conclusive. Mike shook his head, clearly unconvinced. Look, I insisted, growing frustrated. I know what I saw. It was huge, at least 8 feet tall, with thick fur and glowing eyes. It grabbed me, dragged me through the forest. How do you explain these? I pulled up my sleeve, revealing the dark bruises on my arm. Mike's expression softened slightly, but I could see he still didn't believe me. Miss Matthews, I'm not saying you didn't experience something traumatic, but there are a lot of things that could explain those injuries. A bear, maybe, or even a bad fall. It wasn't a bear, I exclaimed, my voice rising. It walked on 2 legs, had hands like a person. It was intelligent, Mike. Evil, but intelligent. He gave me a patronizing look. Emily, I've been working these woods for 20 years. If there was something like what you're describing out here, don't you think I'd have seen some sign of it by now? I opened my mouth to argue further, but something caught my eye. There, between 2 trees, I saw a flash of movement, a massive, shadowy figure disappearing into the undergrowth. My heart raced. There! I pointed, grabbing Mike's arm. Did you see that? Mike turned, squinting in the direction I was pointing. See what? The creature. It was right there, I swear. But by the time Mike looked, whatever I'd seen was gone. He turned back to me, concern etched on his face. Emily, I think maybe we should head back. You've been through a lot and— I'm not crazy, I interrupted, my voice cracking. Please, you have to believe me. Mike sighed, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. Let's get you back to town. You should rest. As we headed back to the trailhead, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every sound a potential danger. Mike kept throwing concerned glances my way, but remained silent. Back in town, Mike dropped me off at my motel. Get some rest, he advised. And Emily? Maybe consider talking to someone about what happened. There are professionals who can help you process traumatic experiences. I nodded numbly, knowing it was useless to argue further. As I watched him drive away, a wave of despair washed over me. No one believed me. The creature was still out there, and I had no way to prove it. That night I lay awake in my motel room, plagued by memories of the attack. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing eyes, felt those powerful hands grabbing me. Sleep seemed impossible. I got up and paced the small room, my mind racing. There had to be a way to prove what I'd seen, to make people believe me. But how? The creature had left no concrete evidence, and my injuries could be explained away by any number of mundane accidents. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains, I made a decision. I couldn't just let this go. I had to find a way to prove the creature's existence, not just for my own sake, but for the safety of others. I grabbed my laptop and began researching. Bigfoot sightings, cryptozoology, anything that might give me a lead. I knew it was a long shot, but I had to try. Because if I didn't, who would? And how long before that creature claimed another victim? As I delved deeper into my research, a plan began to form. It was risky, potentially dangerous, but it might be my only chance. I would need equipment, allies, and a whole lot of courage. But I was determined. One way or another, I would find the truth about what lurked in those woods. And as the sun rose on a new day, I steeled myself for the challenges ahead. The investigation had only just begun. After the fruitless investigation with the park ranger, I knew I needed to take my story to someone with more authority. With a mix of hope and trepidation, I made my way to the local police station. Surely they would take my account seriously. The station was small, typical of a rural town. A middle-aged officer sat behind the desk looking up as I entered. His name tag read Officer Thompson. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked, his tone polite but disinterested. I took a deep breath. "Yes, I need to report an attack." His demeanor shifted instantly, becoming more alert. "An attack? Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" "No, I'm okay. It happened yesterday, but it wasn't a person who attacked me. It was..." I hesitated, knowing how it would sound. "It was Bigfoot." Officer Thompson's expression changed, skepticism creeping into his eyes. "Bigfoot? Ma'am, are you sure about that?" I launched into my story, describing the terrifying encounter in detail. As I spoke, I could see the officer's skepticism turning to amusement. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "You expect me to believe you were attacked by Bigfoot?" he said. "Ma'am, I think you've been reading too many tabloids." "But it's true," I insisted, my voice rising. "Look at these bruises, these cuts. Something attacked me." Officer Thompson sighed. "I believe you think something happened to you. But Bigfoot? Come on. We get bear attacks sometimes, maybe that's what you saw." "It wasn't a bear," I said, frustration building. "It walked on 2 legs. It had hands. Please, you have to believe me." "Listen," he said, his tone softening. "Why don't you go home, get some rest? If you remember anything else, anything real, come back and we can file a report. Okay?" Defeated, I left the station, but I wasn't ready to give up. If the police wouldn't believe me, maybe experts would. I spent the next few hours reaching out to wildlife experts and cryptozoologists. Surely, they would be more open to the possibility. But with each call, each email, I was met with the same dismissive tone. "There's no credible evidence for Bigfoot," a biologist named Dr. Larson told me over the phone. "What you experienced was likely a case of misidentification, possibly coupled with the trauma of getting lost in the woods. But I know what I saw," I argued. "It was real. It was right there in front of me." "The human mind can play tricks on us, especially in stressful situations," Dr. Larson explained patiently. "Without any physical evidence, I'm afraid I can't support your claim." Frustrated and desperate, I turned to the people who knew me best. Surely my friends and family would believe me. I called my sister Sarah, hoping for some support. "You've got to be kidding me," Sarah said with a laugh when I told her my story. "Bigfoot? Really, Emily?" "I'm serious, Sarah," I pleaded. "Why would I make this up?" "I don't know, Em. Maybe you hit your head or something? Are you sure you're okay?" I could hear the concern in her voice mixed with pity. She didn't believe me either. As night fell, I found myself alone in my motel room, staring at the bandages covering my wounds. They were the only physical proof I had of the attack, but even they weren't enough to convince anyone. I unwrapped the bandage on my arm, wincing at the sight of the deep scratches underneath. They were real. The pain was real. So why couldn't anyone believe me? I walked to the window, looking out at the dark forest in the distance. The creature was out there somewhere, I was sure of it, but it had vanished without a trace, leaving me with nothing but the memory of its savage assault and a story no one would believe. Tears of frustration welled up in my eyes. I felt so alone, so helpless. How could I make people understand what I'd been through? How could I warn them about the danger lurking in those woods? I sat down on the bed, my mind racing. There had to be a way to prove what I'd seen, to make people believe me. But how? As I pondered my next move, a news report on the small motel TV caught my attention. The anchor was talking about a string of mysterious disappearances in national parks across the country. Could it be? I whispered to myself. Was it possible that what attacked me wasn't an isolated incident? Were there others out there who had encountered similar creatures? A spark of determination ignited within me. I might not have evidence and no one might believe me now, but I wasn't going to give up. I would find a way to uncover the truth, to expose the reality of what lurked in those woods. As I drifted off to an uneasy sleep, my mind was already formulating a plan. Tomorrow, I would start digging deeper. I would find others who had similar experiences, and somehow, some way, I would find the proof I needed to make the world believe. The creature might have vanished, but I wasn't about to let this go. Not when lives could be at stake. As I closed my eyes, I made a silent promise to myself and to anyone else who might have faced this terror. I would find the truth, no matter what it took. The night after my futile attempts to convince others of what I'd experienced, I finally succumbed to exhaustion, but sleep brought no respite from the terror that had become my constant companion. In my dreams, I was back in that forest, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to close in around me. The darkness was oppressive, broken only by a pair of glowing eyes that pierced through the gloom. I could hear the creature's heavy breathing, smell its musty odor. Suddenly, it was upon me. Massive hands grabbed at my clothes, razor-sharp claws tearing into my flesh. I screamed, but no sound came out. The creature's face loomed before me, its gnashing teeth inches from my face. I woke with a start, drenched in cold sweat, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The dim light of dawn was just beginning to filter through the motel curtains, but I knew sleep would not return. As I showered and dressed, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. Dark circles under my eyes betrayed my lack of sleep, and the healing cuts and bruises served as a constant reminder of my ordeal. I looked haunted, and I felt it too. Stepping outside, I was immediately on edge. The forest loomed in the distance, a wall of green that now seemed menacing rather than inviting. I found myself constantly scanning the tree line, jumping at every unexpected sound. A car backfiring in the distance made me nearly leap out of my skin. "Are you okay, miss?" An elderly man walking his dog gave me a concerned look. I forced a smile, trying to appear normal. "Yes, thank you, just a bit jumpy this morning." He nodded sympathetically and moved on, but I could feel his eyes on me as I hurried away. Was I that obvious? Could everyone see the fear that was eating me alive? As the day wore on, I found myself unable to relax. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every rustle of leaves a potential danger. The forest, once a place of peace and adventure, had become a source of terror that haunted my every waking moment. When night fell, I couldn't bring myself to leave my motel room. The thought of that monstrous creature lurking in the darkness was too much to bear. I double-checked the locks on the door and windows, drew the curtains tight, and huddled on the bed, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. My phone buzzed, a text from my sister Sarah. "Hey Em, haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay?" I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How could I explain what I was going through? I settled for a simple lie. "Yeah, just busy. Talk soon." As the days passed, my physical wounds began to heal, but the psychological scars remained raw and painful. I became withdrawn, barely leaving my room except for necessities. When I did venture out, I was jumpy and irritable, flinching at sudden movements and snapping at well-meaning strangers who tried to strike up conversation. My friends and family grew increasingly concerned. The phone calls and messages became more frequent, more insistent. "Emily, what's going on?" Sarah's voice was filled with worry during one of our rare conversations. "You don't sound like yourself. Are you sure you're okay?" "I'm fine," I insisted, my voice flat even to my own ears. Just going through some stuff. I'll be all right. Maybe you should come home for a while," she suggested gently. "Get away from whatever's bothering you there." But I couldn't leave. As much as the forest terrified me, the thought of that creature being out there, potentially hurting others, kept me rooted to this place. I had to find a way to prove what had happened, to make people believe me. In the quiet of my room, I would sit for hours, staring at the wall, replaying the attack over and over in my mind. Every detail was seared into my memory. The creature's massive form, its inhuman strength, the savage roar that still echoed in my ears. I tried to make sense of it all. How could such a creature exist without anyone knowing? Why had it attacked me? And why wouldn't anyone believe me? One evening, as I sat lost in these thoughts, a knock at the door startled me out of my reverie. My heart rate spiked, and I approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" I called, my voice trembling slightly. "It's Mike, the park ranger," came the reply. "Just wanted to check in on you, make sure you're doing okay." I hesitated, then slowly opened the door. Mike stood there, concern etched on his weathered face. "Emily," he said softly, taking in my disheveled appearance. "I've been worried about you. No one's seen you around town much lately." I shrugged, not meeting his eyes. "I'm fine, just been keeping to myself." Mike sighed. "Look, I know you went through something traumatic out there. I may not believe in Bigfoot, but I believe you experienced something that scared you badly. Have you considered talking to someone? There are professionals who can help." "I don't need help," I snapped, more harshly than I intended. "I need people to believe me. That thing is out there, Mike. It's real and it's dangerous." He held up his hands in a placating gesture. Okay. I just wanted to make sure you're all right. If you need anything, you know where to find me." As I closed the door behind him, I felt a mix of gratitude for his concern and frustration at his continued disbelief. I leaned against the door, closing my eyes as the creature's roar once again echoed in my mind. I knew then that I couldn't go on like this. The fear, the isolation, the constant replaying of that horrific night, it was destroying me. I had to do something, had to find a way to prove what I'd seen. As I moved away from the door, a new determination took hold. I would find evidence no matter what it took. I would make them believe me. And maybe, just maybe, I would finally be free of the terror that had taken over my life. Little did I know, this decision would lead me down a path even more dangerous than the one I'd already traveled. The days following my encounter with the creature blurred into a frenzied quest for answers. I barely ate or slept, my every waking moment consumed by the need to prove what I had seen. My motel room became a makeshift research center, the walls plastered with printouts of alleged Bigfoot sightings and blurry photographs. I hunched over my laptop, eyes strained from countless hours of scrolling through cryptozoology forums and obscure websites. "There has to be something," I muttered, clicking through yet another grainy video purporting to show the elusive creature. Books on Bigfoot theories and unexplained phenomena littered the floor around me. I'd read each one cover to cover, desperately searching for any detail that might corroborate my experience. But the more I read, the more frustrated I became. So many accounts, yet so little concrete evidence. Determined to find someone who would take me seriously, I began reaching out to every Bigfoot enthusiast and researcher I could find. I fired off emails, made phone calls, even sent handwritten letters to those who seemed most credible. "Please," I begged, during one particularly lengthy phone call with a self-proclaimed Bigfoot expert. "I know what I saw. It was real, and it was terrifying. There has to be some explanation." The man on the other end sighed. "Look, miss, I've been in this field for 30 years. I want to believe, but without hard evidence, it's just another story. Do you have any proof? Photos? Hair samples?" "No, but then I'm afraid I can't help you. These woods are full of bears and other wildlife. It's easy to misinterpret things, especially in the dark." I slammed the phone down, frustration boiling over. Why wouldn't anyone believe me? As the days wore on, a new plan began to form in my mind. If no one would believe me, I'd have to get the evidence myself. I started researching high-powered cameras and voice recorders, planning a return trip to the forest. "I'll catch it on film," I told myself, scribbling notes on equipment specifications. "Then they'll have to believe me." My obsession didn't go unnoticed. My sister, Sarah, called daily, her voice growing increasingly concerned. "Emily, please. she pleaded during our latest conversation. "This isn't healthy. You need to let this go and come home." "I can't, Sarah," I insisted. "You don't understand. That thing is out there, and people need to know. I have to prove it." "And what if you can't?" she asked softly. "What if you go back into those woods and something happens to you? Please, Em, we're all worried about you." I hung up, unable to explain the burning need that consumed me. How could I move on, knowing what I knew? The creature was real, and I had to vindicate myself. As night fell, I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the motel, every rustle of leaves outside sent my heart racing. Was it out there? Watching? Waiting? The thought of the beast lurking in the shadows filled me with paralyzing fear, yet I couldn't shake the compulsion to seek it out again. It was a maddening contradiction, terror warring with an almost primal need for answers. I rolled over, reaching for my notebook. In the dim light, I began sketching out a plan for my return to the forest. I'd need supplies, camping gear, and of course the camera and recorder. It would be dangerous, but I saw no other choice. As I scribbled notes, a soft thud outside my window made me freeze. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to listen. Was it just my imagination, or had something moved out there? Slowly, cautiously, I approached the window. My hand trembled as I reached for the curtain. With a quick motion, I pulled it back, half expecting to see glowing eyes staring back at me. But there was nothing there, just the empty parking lot and the dark line of trees beyond. I let out a shaky breath, chiding myself for being so jumpy. But as I turned back to my planning, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Morning found me exhausted, but more determined than ever. I'd finalized my plans and ordered the equipment I'd need. In just a few days, I'd be heading back into the forest, ready to face my fears and find the truth. As I packed my bag, preparing to check out of the motel and move to a campsite closer to the forest's edge, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "Em, please reconsider this. We love you and we're scared for you. Come home." I stared at the message, a lump forming in my throat. Part of me wanted to listen, to give up this obsessive quest and return to my normal life. But I knew I couldn't. Not until I had answers. With a heavy heart, I typed out a reply. "I'm sorry, but I have to do this. I'll be careful, I promise. I love you all." As I hit send, a sense of finality washed over me. There was no turning back now. In a few days, I'd be face to face with my fears, searching for proof of the creature that had upended my life. I shouldered my bag and took one last look around the motel room that had been my home and research center for the past weeks. The walls, now bare of my frenzied notes and printouts, seemed to mock me with their emptiness. As I stepped outside, the forest loomed in the distance, both terrifying and beckoning. Whatever happened next, I knew my life would never be the same. The truth was out there, hidden in those woods, and I was determined to find it, no matter the cost. The morning air was crisp as I stood at the edge of the forest, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. The trees loomed before me, a dark and foreboding presence that seemed to whisper warnings on the gentle breeze. But I was past heeding warnings now. "You're making a mistake, miss," the elderly shopkeeper had said when I'd bought my supplies. "Those woods ain't safe, especially not for someone alone." I'd smiled tightly, checking my camera and voice recorder one last time. "I'll be fine. I know what I'm doing." Now, facing the dense wall of greenery, I wasn't so sure, but I couldn't turn back. Not when I was so close to proving what I'd seen, to validating the experience that had turned my life upside down. Taking a deep breath, I stepped onto the trail. The forest seemed to swallow me whole, the sounds of the town quickly fading away, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the occasional bird call. As I ventured deeper, a familiar sense of unease crept over me. Every shadow held a potential threat, every sound a possible warning. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I found myself constantly glancing over my shoulder. Was the creature out there waiting? Did it remember me? Get it together, Emily, I muttered to myself, gripping my camera tighter. You're here for evidence, not to scare yourself silly. But easier said than done. As the hours wore on and I pushed further into the forest, my nerves grew increasingly frayed. The quiet was oppressive, broken only by my own labored breathing and the crunch of leaves under my feet. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the trees. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat, camera at the ready. But it was only a startled deer, its eyes wide with fear as it bounded away into the underbrush. I let out a shaky laugh, more from relief than amusement. Jumpy much, Em? I chided myself, trying to slow my racing pulse. But the incident had shaken me more than I cared to admit. I pressed on, determined to capture proof of the creature's existence, but doubt began to creep in. What if I was wrong? What if there was nothing out here but trees and wildlife, and I'd let my imagination run wild that night? No. I shook my head firmly, banishing the thoughts. I knew what I'd seen. The creature was real, and I would prove it. As the day wore on, however, my confidence began to waver. The forest remained eerily quiet, devoid of any signs of the massive, hairy beast I'd encountered. No footprints, no strange sounds, nothing out of the ordinary at all. Frustration and exhaustion began to set in. I'd been walking for hours and the light was starting to fade. Soon it would be too dark to see, let alone gather evidence. Maybe this was a mistake, I muttered, leaning against a tree to catch my breath. The weight of my backpack seemed to have doubled and my feet ached from the endless walking. With a heavy sigh, I turned to head back. It was time to face facts. I wasn't going to find anything today. Maybe I never would. And then I saw it. A sudden movement in the corner of my eye made me freeze. There, between the trees, was a shadowy figure. Massive. Still. Watching. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, carefully, I raised my camera. This was it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Hello? I called out, my voice trembling slightly. Is someone there? No response. Just that unnerving stillness. I took a tentative step forward, my finger poised over the camera's shutter button. I'm not here to hurt you, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I just want to understand. Another step. The figure remained motionless, but I could feel its gaze upon me. My heart hammered in my chest, a mix of terror and exhilaration coursing through my veins. Just a little closer, just one clear shot. That's all I needed. I inched forward again, my eyes never leaving the shadowy form, and then, just as I was about to press the shutter, it moved. With a speed that seemed impossible for something so large, the figure darted behind a cluster of trees. I gasped, stumbling forward. Wait, I cried out, all caution forgotten in my desperation. Please, I need to see you. But it was gone. The forest had swallowed it up, leaving me alone once more. I stood there panting, my camera hanging uselessly at my side. Had it really been there? Or was my mind playing tricks on me, conjuring the very thing I so desperately wanted to see? As the last of the daylight faded, I realized I had a choice to make. Night was falling and I was deep in the forest. The smart thing would be to head back, to try again another day. But the thought of leaving now when I'd been so close was unbearable. What if this was my only chance? With a deep breath, I made my decision. I would stay. I would set up camp here in this very spot and wait. The creature had been here once, maybe it would return. As I unpacked my tent with shaking hands, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The forest seemed alive around me, full of whispers and shadows. I know you're out there, I said softly, more to myself than anything else. And I'm going to prove it. Little did I know, as I zipped myself into my tent that night, that my determination would soon be put to the ultimate test. The true horror of the forest was yet to reveal itself, and I was woefully unprepared for what was to come. My hands trembled as I raised the camera, desperately trying to focus on the shadowy figure lurking between the trees. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would give away my position. Just one clear shot, that's all I needed. But as my finger hovered over the shutter button, the figure melted into the darkness, leaving me with nothing but the eerie silence of the forest. "No," I whispered fiercely, frustration and fear battling within me. I'd come too far to give up now. Without thinking, I plunged forward into the undergrowth, following the direction the creature had gone. The forest seemed to close in around me, branches clawing at my clothes, roots threatening to trip me with every step. The air grew thick with tension, and I could swear I heard heavy breathing that wasn't my own. I paused, straining my ears. The forest had gone unnaturally quiet, as if every living thing was holding its breath. Then I heard it, a low, rumbling growl emanating from behind a dense thicket of bushes just ahead. My own breath caught in my throat as I edged closer, camera clutched to my chest like a lifeline. "Please," I murmured, though I wasn't sure if I was pleading for the creature to show itself or to leave me alone. "Please." As if in answer to my whispered prayer, the bushes parted, and there it was, the massive, hulking form of the Bigfoot. In the dim forest light, I could make out matted fur, powerful limbs, and a face that was a nightmarish blend of human and ape. But it was the eyes that held me transfixed, glowing with an intelligence that was anything but animal. For a moment we stared at each other, frozen in a tableau of mutual shock. Then the spell broke. The creature's lips pulled back in a snarl, revealing yellowed fangs, and a guttural roar ripped from its throat. The sound shook me to my core, snapping me out of my paralysis. I stumbled backward, fumbling with the camera. "Oh God, oh God," I gasped, my fingers refusing to cooperate as I tried to turn it on. But the beast was faster. With surprising agility for something so large, it charged straight at me. Instinct took over. I turned and ran, abandoning all thoughts of evidence or proof. The only thing that mattered now was survival. I could hear the creature's thunderous footsteps behind me, gaining ground with every stride. Branches whipped at my face as I fled, leaving stinging scratches, but I barely felt them. My lungs burned, and my legs screamed in protest, but terror drove me onward. "Help!" I screamed, though I knew there was no one to hear me. "Somebody help me!" I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. The creature was mere feet behind me, its massive arms outstretched, ready to grab me. I could see the murderous intent in its glowing eyes, smell its musky, animal odor. Panic gave me a burst of speed, but I knew I couldn't outrun it forever. My foot caught on an exposed root, and I went down hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. I rolled onto my back, expecting to feel the creature's crushing weight at any moment, but it had stopped. The Bigfoot stood over me, its chest heaving, those terrible eyes boring into mine. Was it hesitating? "Please," I whimpered, holding up my hands in a futile gesture of defense. "Please don't hurt me." The creature tilted its head, almost as if it were considering my words. For a wild moment, I thought maybe I could reason with it, communicate somehow. But then its face contorted into a mask of rage, and it let out another ear-splitting roar. I scrambled backward, my hand closing around a hefty branch. Without thinking, I swung it with all my might, connecting with the creature's knee. It howled in pain and fury, stumbling back just enough for me to regain my footing. I ran again, no longer caring about direction or where I was going. All that mattered was putting distance between myself and that monster. I could hear it crashing through the undergrowth behind me, its roars of rage echoing through the trees. My foot slipped on some loose rocks, and I found myself tumbling down a steep incline. I rolled and bounced, unable to stop my descent, sharp rocks and branches tearing at my skin. When I finally came to a stop at the bottom, I lay there for a moment, dazed and in pain. The sound of breaking branches above me jolted me back to awareness. The creature was making its way down the slope more carefully than I had, but still with terrifying speed. I forced myself to my feet, ignoring the protests of my battered body, and started running again. The trees began to thin out, and I could see lights in the distance, The town. If I could just make it there, I'd be safe. With renewed determination, I pushed myself harder, my legs pumping furiously. Behind me, I heard a final, frustrated roar. Was it giving up? I didn't dare look back to check. The edge of the forest was just ahead, the welcome sight of buildings beyond. With a final burst of speed, I broke through the tree line, stumbling onto the deserted road. I bent over, hands on my knees, gasping for breath. When I finally gathered the courage to look back, the forest stood dark and silent. There was no sign of the creature. As the adrenaline began to fade, the full weight of what had just happened crashed over me. I'd seen it. I'd been right all along. But once again, I had no proof. No one would believe me. I sank to the ground, overwhelmed by a mix of relief, frustration, and lingering terror. As I sat there trying to process everything, I knew one thing for certain. I would never set foot in those woods again. The truth I'd sought had nearly cost me my life, and some truths I realized were better left undiscovered. But as I limped back towards town, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The creature was still out there, and now it knew I knew about it. What would happen next? Only time would tell, and I had a sinking feeling that my ordeal was far from over. The forest seemed to close in around me, the air thick with the scent of pine and terror. My lungs burned as I pushed myself to run faster, the thunderous footsteps of the creature growing closer with each passing second. Branches whipped at my face, leaving stinging welts. But I couldn't slow down. I couldn't look back. The memory of those glowing eyes and gnashing teeth was all the motivation I needed to keep moving. Suddenly, I caught a glimpse of something through the trees. The faint glow of streetlights. The road. If I could just make it there, maybe I'd be safe. Maybe someone would see me, would believe me, would believe. With a final burst of energy I didn't know I possessed, I sprinted towards the light. The creature's hot breath was practically on my neck now, its guttural growls sending shivers down my spine. Just a few more steps. I burst through the tree line onto the deserted road, the sudden transition from dense forest to open space nearly causing me to stumble. My feet hit the asphalt, and I spun around, heart pounding, to face my pursuer. The massive hair-covered form of the Bigfoot stood at the edge of the forest, its chest heaving. Those terrifying eyes locked onto mine, filled with a mixture of rage and... was that curiosity? For a moment we stood frozen, human and beast, separated by mere yards of empty road. Then the creature reared back its head and let out an ear-splitting roar that seemed to shake the very ground beneath my feet. I clapped my hands over my ears, wincing at the primal fury in that sound. When I looked up again, the Bigfoot was turning away, melting back into the shadows of the forest that had hidden it for so long. I stood there trembling, watching the spot where it had vanished. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I could feel warm trickles of blood from where branches had scratched my face and arms. Slowly, the realization that I had survived, again, began to sink in. "Oh God," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Oh God, oh God." My legs gave out and I sank to my knees on the cold asphalt. That's when I noticed the weight missing from my shoulder. With a sinking feeling, I looked around and spotted my camera lying in pieces near the edge of the road. In my panic, I must have dropped it during my mad dash to safety. "No," I moaned, crawling over to the shattered remains. "No, no, no." I picked up the largest piece, a chunk of the camera body with wires hanging out. The memory card was nowhere to be seen. The proof I had so desperately sought, the vindication I had risked my life for. It was gone, scattered in the underbrush or crushed beneath the creature's massive feet. Tears of frustration and fear welled up in my eyes. I had come so close, had seen the beast with my own eyes once again, and I had nothing to show for it. No one would believe me. I would be dismissed as a crackpot, a liar, or worse. A car's headlights appeared in the distance, growing brighter as it approached. I scrambled to my feet, waving my arms frantically. The vehicle, an old pickup truck, slowed to a stop beside me. The driver, an older man with a weathered face and a thick gray beard, rolled down his window and peered out at me with concern. Good Lord, miss, are you all right? What happened to you? I must have been quite a sight. Clothes torn, scratches on my face and arms, wild-eyed and trembling. I opened my mouth to explain, but the words caught in my throat. How could I possibly make him understand? I was attacked, I managed to stammer out. In the woods. It was huge, and the man's expression shifted from concern to wariness. Attacked? By what? A bear? I shook my head vehemently. No, not a bear. You're going to think I'm crazy, but it was Bigfoot. I swear to God it was real, and it chased me, and... The driver's face fell and he let out a heavy sigh. Oh, honey, not this again. Look, why don't you hop in and I'll take you back to town? You look like you could use a doctor, or at least a stiff drink. You don't believe me, I said, my voice small and defeated. He shook his head, a mixture of pity and exasperation in his eyes. I've lived in these parts for 65 years, miss. Ain't never seen hide nor hair of no Bigfoot. Now, are you getting in, or do I need to call the sheriff? Shoulders slumping, I climbed into the passenger seat of the truck. As we drove away, I couldn't help but look back at the dark line of trees. Was the creature still there, watching? Would it follow? The questions swirled in my mind, but I knew better than to voice them aloud. The drive back to town was silent and tense. I could feel the driver's sideways glances, could practically hear the wheels turning in his head as he tried to figure out what to make of me. When we pulled up in front of my motel, I mumbled a thank you and climbed out. You take care now, the man said, his tone making it clear he thought I needed more help than he could provide. And maybe stay out of them woods for a while, yeah? I nodded numbly and watched as he drove away, leaving me alone in the garish glow of the motel's neon sign. With heavy steps, I made my way to the front office. The night clerk, a pimply-faced teenager, looked up from his phone as I entered. Holy crap, he exclaimed, eyes widening as he took in my disheveled appearance. What happened to you? I opened my mouth, then closed it again. What was the point? Instead, I simply said, I need a first aid kit. Do you have one? The clerk nodded, still staring. Yeah, let me grab it. You want me to call an ambulance or something? No, I said quickly. No, I'm fine. Just need to clean up a bit. He disappeared into a back room and returned a moment later with a battered white metal box. As he handed it over, his curiosity seemed to get the better of him. Seriously, what happened? You look like you got in a fight with a mountain lion or something. I let out a bitter laugh. If only it had been something as mundane as a mountain lion. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. The clerk leaned forward, elbows on the counter. Try me. I'm bored out of my skull here. Could use a good story. For a moment I was tempted, but the memory of all the dismissive looks, the pitying glances, the not-so-subtle implications that I was losing my mind, it was all too fresh. Maybe some other time, I said, forcing a weak smile. Thanks for the first aid kit. I retreated to my room, locking the door behind me and leaning against it with a heavy sigh. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, and every scratch and bruise made itself known. My muscles ached from the frantic run through the forest, and my head pounded with the beginnings of what promised to be a killer headache. Stumbling to the bathroom, I flicked on the harsh fluorescent light and caught sight of myself in the mirror. The clerk's reaction suddenly made a lot more sense. My hair was a tangled mess, filled with twigs and leaves. Scratches crisscrossed my face and arms, some still oozing blood. My clothes were torn and dirty, and there was a wild, haunted look in my eyes that I barely recognized. Jesus, I muttered, running a trembling hand through my hair. What am I doing? I stripped off my ruined clothes and stepped into the shower, letting the hot water wash away the dirt and blood. As I stood there, the events of the night played over and over in my mind. The creature's roar, its glowing eyes, the feeling of utter helplessness as it chased me through the dark forest. It had been real. I knew it had been real. But how could I prove it? After bandaging the worst of my scratches, I collapsed onto the bed. utterly exhausted. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the Bigfoot's massive form, heard its bone-chilling growl. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to move, and every creak of the old motel made me flinch. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains, I gave up on sleep. I needed to talk to someone, needed to try one more time to make someone understand what I had seen. Grabbing my phone, I dialed my sister's number. She answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Hello? Sarah? Do you have any idea what time it is?" "I'm sorry," I said, my voice cracking. I need to talk to you." There must have been something in my tone that worried her, because her next words were full of concern. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Katie, I saw it again. The Bigfoot. It chased me through the woods, and I barely got away, and—" "Oh, Sarah," Katie interrupted, her voice a mixture of exasperation and pity. "Not this again. I thought you were past all this Bigfoot nonsense." "It's not nonsense," I insisted, my frustration bubbling over. "I know what I saw. It was real, Katie. Why won't anyone believe me?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Katie spoke again, her voice was gentle, as if she were talking to a child. "Honey, I think maybe you need to come home. This obsession isn't healthy. Maybe we can find you someone to talk to. Someone who can help." "I don't need a shrink," I snapped. "I need someone to believe me. My voice broke, and I felt hot tears running down my cheeks. "I need my sister to trust me." Katie sighed heavily. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I love you, but Bigfoot? It's just not possible. You've been through a lot, and maybe your mind is playing tricks on you. Please, just come home. We can figure this out together." I wanted to argue, wanted to make her understand. But the fight had gone out of me. "Yeah," I said dully. "Yeah, okay, I'll think about it." We said our goodbyes, and I tossed the phone onto the nightstand. The room suddenly felt too small, too confining. I needed air. Throwing on some clean clothes, I made my way outside. The early morning air was crisp and cool, a stark contrast to the stuffy motel room. I wandered aimlessly, eventually finding myself at the small diner where I had first been warned about the dangers of the forest. The same waitress from before was there, filling coffee cups for the handful of early morning patrons. She looked up as I entered, her eyes widening in recognition. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," she said, gesturing for me to take a seat at the counter. "You look like you've been through the ringer, hun. Coffee?" I nodded gratefully, sinking onto one of the worn vinyl stools. The waitress, her name tag read Doris, poured me a steaming cup and leaned on the counter, studying me with knowing eyes. "So," she said after a moment, "you went into those woods at night, didn't you?" I looked up sharply. "How did you—" Doris shook her head, clucking her tongue. "Honey, I've lived in this town my whole life. I know that look. You saw something out there, didn't you? Something you can't explain?" For a moment, hope flared in my chest. "You believe me?" The waitress straightened up, her expression unreadable. "I believe that there are things in this world that defy explanation, things that most folks aren't ready to accept." She leaned in close, lowering her voice. "And I believe that sometimes it's better to keep those things to yourself." I blinked, taken aback. But if it's real, don't people have a right to know? Shouldn't someone do something about it?" Doris gave me a sad smile. "And what exactly do you think anyone could do? Hunt it down? Lock it up in a zoo? Some secrets are meant to stay secret for everyone's good." "But—" She held up a hand, cutting me off. "Listen, I'm not saying I know what you saw out there, but I will say this. You're not the first person to come in here with that haunted look in their eyes, and you won't be the last. My advice? Go home. Try to forget about whatever it was you saw. Live your life." I stared down into my coffee cup, watching the dark liquid swirl. I don't know if I can, I admitted softly. Doris reached out and patted my hand. You can, and you will. Time has a way of dulling even the sharpest memories, and who knows? Maybe someday you'll look back on all this as nothing more than a strange dream. As I sat there, mulling over her words, the bell over the diner door jingled. I glanced up to see the local sheriff walk in, his eyes immediately landing on me. Well, well, he said, ambling over. If it isn't our resident Bigfoot hunter. Heard you had quite an adventure last night. I tensed, waiting for the mockery, the dismissal. But to my surprise, the sheriff's tone was almost sympathetic. He slid onto the stool next to me, nodding to Doris for his usual coffee. Look, he said, turning to face me. I know you believe what you saw was real, and I'm not here to argue with you about it, but I am here to strongly suggest that you pack up and head home. Are you kicking me out of town? I asked, incredulous. The sheriff shook his head. No, nothing like that. Consider it friendly advice. These woods, they have a way of getting into people's heads, making them see things, believe things. It's not good for folks to spend too much time obsessing over what might or might not be out there. I opened my mouth to protest, but he held up a hand. I'm not finished. Now I've got a report here of a woman running out of the woods last night, looking like she'd been through hell. That was you, wasn't it? Slowly I nodded. Right. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to file that report as a possible bear encounter. You got spooked, took a tumble in the dark, and your imagination did the rest. That sound fair? I wanted to argue, to insist on the truth, but as I looked from the sheriff's face to Doris's, I saw something in their eyes. Not disbelief exactly, but a kind of weary acceptance. They had heard stories like mine before, maybe even had experiences of their own. But they had chosen to keep the secret, to maintain the status quo. Yeah, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, okay. The sheriff nodded, seemingly satisfied. Good. Now, is there someone who can come pick you up? Family, maybe? I thought of Katie, of her offer to come home. Maybe it was time to take her up on it. My sister, I said. I can call my sister. Excellent, the sheriff said, standing up. You do that. And miss, take care of yourself. Try not to dwell on whatever it is you think you saw out there. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. As he walked away, Doris refilled my coffee cup. He's right, you know, she said softly. Some things, once seen, can't be unseen, but that doesn't mean you have to let them consume you. I nodded, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. I don't know how to move past this, how to forget. Doris gave me a sad smile. You don't forget, honey. You just learn to live with it. And who knows? Maybe someday you'll meet someone else who's seen what you've seen. And then, well, at least you won't be alone. I spent the rest of the morning in that diner, nursing my coffee and trying to come to terms with what had happened. By the time I called Katie to ask her to come get me, I had made a decision. I would go home, would try to put this all behind me, but I wouldn't forget. I couldn't. As I packed up my belongings in the motel room, my eyes kept drifting to the woods, visible through the window.